We'll get started with our next panel, the history panel. So as with the previous session and with the ones that will be coming up later today, if you have any questions for our panelists, please just drop them in the chat for the Q&A session that will happen after they've all presented questions, comments, etc. And we'll get to them once they have all spoken. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Anna-Lea Krampe. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up yes. So Anna-Lea is a bisexual historian from Germany. In 2024, she finished her Master of Arts in History with the profile History of Pre-Modernity at Bielefeld University. She's currently doing her PhD on adultery, fornication, and sodomy, which is a social and cultural historical analysis of bisexual behavior in pre-modern oral offense trials, which is what she'll be talking about with us today. So Anna-Lea, without any further delay, I'll pass it on to you, and I believe you should be able to share your screen. So you can go ahead and get us started.
Thank you very much. I hope you all see my presentation and can hear me now. And I will start with my presentation on deception, negligence, drunkenness, and illness, excuses used by homosexual and bisexual defendants in pre-modern moral offense proceedings from the 15th to the 17th century, which is part of my PhD, which I've just started this year. So early research results. I will start by providing some context for the 4 cases which I'm going to present, and then I will present 2 cases of bisexual women in the 15th and 16th centuries and 2 cases of bisexual men in the 16th century as well. And finally, I will conclude my talk with a resume. So for the context, we start in the southwest of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation during the 15th to the 17th centuries, and I'm presenting 4 cases of secular proceedings, and it is important to note that pre-modern courts did not operate according to modern logic, particularly regarding sexuality and emotionality, and bisexuality wasn't a term they used back then. So in this context, any form of extramarital or non-reproductive sexuality is defined as sodomy and violates legal norms, especially same-sex sexual encounters. And I will present, as I've said, 4 cases involving the charge of same-sex sodomy and the excuses used by the defendants. To understand pre-modern trials, I also need to discuss torture. Therefore, it is important to note that torture was seen as a means of establishing the truth rather than merely as a form of punishment and pressure during the proceedings. The first case I'm going to present is the case of Else Mutter, which I've also presented last year at this conference, so some of you may already know a bit about this. It took place in the city council of Speyer, and Else Mutter was one of the defendants. She was married to her husband and charged for the charge of female sodomy after having had a one-night stand with the main defendant, Katharina Hetzeldorfer. Mutter's excuse is that the defendant, Katharina Hetzeldorfer, allegedly climbed into her bed and after much handling, climbed on the top of Else and attempted to engage in sexual intercourse with her. So she, Else Mutter, reached down and felt that it was a big thing as big as half an arm. When she felt it, it was like a horn pointed at the front and wide in the back. She could hardly defend herself. She, Else Mutter, also said that she had no choice but to believe that the defendant was a man who had behaved inappropriately. So she used the excuse that she didn't know about the gender of her one-night stand, and for this offense she was exiled 10 miles from Speyer, while the main defendant was drowned after the proceeding. But before going further into the proceedings, I'm going to present the second case of female homo and bisexuality, which concerns the proceeding against Anna Reulin and her wife, Agatha Ditschi. Reulin later marries a man, and this relationship was also the reason for the proceeding. In Freiburg im Breisgau, Reulin and Ditschi are suspected of having engaged in female sodomy and having been legally married, which is also talked about in the proceeding. Anna Reulin also admits that they had been living together as husband and wife for a year and a half, and that she had not known whether Agatha Ditschi was a man or a woman. She, Anna Reulin, only found out at the same time when they were both going to bed one evening. Agatha had urinated beforehand and squatted down to do so. It was only then that Anna Reulin realized and noticed that he was a woman, and was then confirmed. So we did some checking on Agatha, how her body was composed, but Reulin basically used the same excuse as Else Mutter in Speyer. Although Reulin was tortured during the trial, she was not punished afterwards, while her homosexual acting wife used the excuse that afterwards Agatha had spoken kindly to her Anna Reulin, and when asked her not to tell anyone because it had been done by some another evil woman. God knew it, so she had to go out dressed as a man and could no longer love a man. And was therefore tortured with a neck iron during and after the trial and was also exiled, so quite big punishment. Now coming to cases of bisexual men. And I'm presenting the case of Jakob Miller. He was married to his wife and was accused of male sodomy in a secular proceeding at the Augsburg City Council. And he excused his sexual misconduct by saying that it was Miller's 10 years illness that drove him to these actions. Please show mercy. Therefore, he was tortured during the trial and he was also beheaded afterwards. And then we have another case of the City Council of Frankfurt am Main about the suspect Ludwig Baudin, who was married to his wife and had different sexual contacts with men. Ludwig Baudin, now under torture, admitted that he had been touching one of the witnesses while lying in bed with him, but he had been so drunk that he mistook him for his wife. And in another proceeding, he answered that the second question under torture in a similar fashion, saying that he had been too drunk even to remember the incident. He was tortured during the trial, but did not receive any penalty. Coming to the conclusion, there are different factors for sentencing which influenced the sentencing in the pre-modern courts. That is first of all the influence of alcohol or drunkenness, which I've shown here. The first offense, or to an extent also the number of sexual partners, which plays a role in these offenses. Then the age of the defendants, or more accurately minority, and then what we've also seen activity and passivity in sexual acts, especially in the case of Else Mutter, and combined with that, sexual positions, and then for men, especially level of arousal and orgasms, and also impotence, and in that way, illness plays also a role. The expected sentence can range from financial penalties, we have not seen this in these cases, corporal punishments, which often include honor punishments, we've seen in many cases, and capital punishments we've seen as well. As a conclusion, some excuses like drunkenness, deception, and negligence did work, but they are also linked with the defendant's behavior in general, especially the sexual behavior. Other excuses, such as the religious motives, we must bear in mind in this case that sodomy was considered both a sin and an imperial offense at the same time, and illness or perhaps impotence, because we don't know what the illness of the wife of Jacob Miller was. They did not work, but they are also linked with the defendant's behavior and especially the sexual behavior. So in general, I would summarize that sentencing is highly related to contemporary conceptions of femininity and sexuality, and they are not non-existent concepts of bisexuality also play a role in this, but it's more or less the behavior of the defendants than the sexual category they put in. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
Thank you so much, Anna-Lea. I'm sure you'll have lots of great questions in the chat later. So we're going to move on to our second panelist, Svenja Castrup, who is a history student from Germany, whose main research interests include views and attitudes towards gender and sexuality, with a strong focus on masculinity. Currently, they are working towards their bachelor's thesis about eunuchs in greco-roman antiquity. And in her free time, she's very involved in fantasy and role-playing games such as D&D and LARPing. So I'll pass it over to you, Svenja.
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm gonna share my screen now. Let's do that and start the presentation. Yeah, All right, I'm really excited to be talking to you about Ivan IV and Fyodor Basmanov, historical figures between queer icons and bloodthirsty sinners. And yeah, first a quick recap, who were Ivan IV and Fyodor Basmanov historically. And Ivan IV was the first Tsar of all of Russia, and he had several marriages and affairs throughout his lifetime. And he's most prominently remembered as the Terrible, and also because of his eccentric rule, and he's most famous for actually the number of gruesome executions that happened under his rulership. And now Fyodor, on the other hand, is a member of Ivan's hand-picked group of henchmen called the Oprichnina, and he even became commander of the Oprichnina army and also Ivan's cupbearer throughout his career. So we can see a very quick rise through the ranks. Fyodor was quite young at the time. And later, when he became married, he actually married into the Tsar's family through his wife. And he had 2 sons with said wife. And later, when Ivan actually executed all his important henchmen, it's not clear what happened to Fyodor, and it's quite probable that he was actually spared and sent into exile, unlike anyone else. And this fits very well with the fact that we actually have several sources recording a sexual relationship between the 2 of them. So how are these figures adapted by different artists? First, I would like to talk about Tolstoy's adaptation from 1862. And his Ivan is very distrustful, but also manipulative of all his closest people. And at the same time, struggling internally, questioning whether his rule is right and just. And then the Fyodor here is actually devoid of most of his titles and therefore very dissatisfied and insecure about his position. And at the same time, he does enthusiastically participate in Ivan's cruel rulership. But he's also very much characterized by lacking masculinity. He's immediately presented as standing out as an androgynous person without a beard, with long hair. And then this also again goes together with him being in love with Ivan in this adaptation. And again, they have a sexual relationship. But Tolstoy doesn't really place a big emphasis on that alone. What he brings out, or adds on top of that, is an Orientalist motive where Fyodor cross-dresses for Ivan and dances for him in women's clothing. And together with all that, also none of their wives ever appear within the story. And Ivan and Fyodor are basically the only like sexualized relationship throughout the entire book at all. And tragically, this does end with Ivan falsely believing Fyodor has betrayed him and executing him. And what makes Fyodor an especially tragic figure here is he doesn't even want to be cross-dressing for Ivan. The whole court ridicules him for that, and Ivan refuses to help. Yeah, so we very much see Fyodor being turned into a tragic deviant in the view of the audience at that time, and Ivan as a huge negative influence. And yeah, there's also quite a number of violent acts that happen in this book. I've given you a list of examples here. But yeah, let's again look at how exactly does their queerness work within the story? Because I think for a modern audience, at first glance, it may seem like Fyodor is more queer-coded, being androgynous, cross-dressing, while Ivan actually almost gets to keep a straight facade since Fyodor is in women's clothing. But actually, this is the other way around. Male-on-male sexuality wasn't a huge issue at Tolstoy's time, at least as viewed by society. And so through this cross-dressing, this Orientalist edition, he actually makes Ivan seem a lot worse and like, yeah, an Orientalist despot. And so here we see how a nobleman explores the dangers of autocracy from his point of view. And this does stand in contrast to the adaptation by Eisenstein, which happened under the Stalinist regime, where Ivan is very much mistrustful and also struggling to really be a strong ruler, but he does manage, and then he marries his first wife, Anastasia, who features very prominently in the first movie, but then she becomes poisoned and dies, and then he's like at a low point, very lonely, and this is when Fyodor comes in. And this Fyodor starts out very innocent, but also immediately admiring Ivan, being very dedicated to him, because he's already seen him on the battlefield. And here we see the first difference. This Fyodor starts out as a soldier, as someone who comes from a very masculine role. And yeah, he comes into Ivan's life, is actually given over to Ivan by his own father as the first man that can serve Ivan in his new oprichnina. And he does help Ivan uncover the plot that killed his wife and avenge her. And throughout all of this, in the second movie, we reach kind of this climactic point in their relationship where Fyodor becomes a replacement for Anastasia. You can see in this scene how important it is simply by the fact that it is shot in color, unlike the rest of the movies. And again, Fyodor is cross-dressing. He has this mask with the braids. He even has like some padding on his chest and traditionally female clothing. And so he goes through this whole relationship of starting out as a subject, then kind of being Ivan's adopted son, and eventually turning into his wife and lover. And Ivan, of course, has the parallel development on his end. But this, again, ends in betrayal. And this time it's real betrayal of Fyodor choosing his loyalty to his biological father over his loyalty to Ivan, and Ivan executes him for that. And here we actually have someone who's exploring the dangers of one-man rule to everyone, including the man who rules. And again, there is a lot of violence that happens in these movies, although most of it would have happened in the third one, especially Fyodor's execution. And it's not just Fyodor being executed. Ivan actually forces Fyodor to first kill his own father, and then he executes Fyodor after that. So again, it's quite tragic. But yeah, how does their queerness play into this? Here we actually have a creator. Eisenstein was queer himself, most likely. Here we actually have a creator who assumed bisexuality as a fundamental human trait. So it's not really a quality of Ivan's that stands out as special. But at the same time, by making Ivan, of course, bisexual, this is also a critique of Stalinist heteronormativity. And Fyodor's cross-dressing, in this case, serves to show all of the layers of their relationship and the depth of it. And it can also be seen as tragic foreshadowing for his looming death, of course, because the mask is a death mask that he's donning there. And so what I think is really interesting, that in more recent adaptations, we see kind of an attempt to what I would call straighten out Ivan, where in the movie from 2009, Fyodor virtually doesn't show up at all. Like, he disappears in the mass of Ivan's other henchmen, and Ivan is very much just portrayed through his struggles with religiousness and God and the church. And then in the show from 2020, Ivan is again very prominently characterized through his relationship, especially with his first wife. And Fyodor is still queer-coded in this. Like, there is a whole scene where they mention that he's not interested in women. But he doesn't really have a relationship with Ivan. Again, like, yeah, we even have a scene of him dancing for Ivan, which is the one on the right. But as you can see, it's very different. It's just a drunk guy on a table. There's no, like, not even a hint of homoeroticism between him and Ivan in particular. But on the other hand, we see this legacy of Tolstoy's and Eisenstein's interpretation live on in queer fandom spaces, but also in other adaptations, for example, in the movie from 1991. And yeah, I think in these pictures, you can really see how the vision is still influencing so many things, especially this book from 2022, which again is written by an author who started out writing Ivan and Fyodor fanfiction that was allegedly explicitly queer to begin with, but obviously with the censorship laws now, the book is a little different, although there were still hesitations in Russian bookstores to sell this book. And I think you can understand why, because I feel like the cover is still very very much a strong reminder of Eisenstein's and Tolstoy's visions. So overall, Eisenstein and Tolstoy have managed, through their representation of Ivan's and Fyodor's queerness, to turn it from a historical footnote into a significant factor in their adaptations. And yes, we have different motives and portrayals, and both of them had to actually fight with censorship and in many parts censor themselves. Especially Eisenstein would have been way more explicit, according to his original scripts. But yeah, overall, they have managed to make them some of the few historical queer figures in Russian media. And I would say for better and worse, because obviously the bloodiness of Ivan's rule always remains and is still a factor in their portrayal. Yeah, I would really like to point you to the two works that I've listed here for further reading, because they do a great job of diving way deeper into this topic. Yeah, and here are some of my sources. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Svenja. That was really, really interesting. All right, so now we have our final panelist, Jinx Vilhas, who is a PhD candidate and MA graduate in social anthropology at the State University of Campinas. They hold a BA in social sciences from the Federal University of Viçosa, including an academic exchange in anthropology at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. Jinx is a member of the editorial board at Proa, a journal of anthropology and art, currently serving as the section editor, and is affiliated with the Brazilian Anthropological Association. Finally, they are part of the Trans and Transvestite Studies Network and the Brazilian Network for Studies on Bisexuality and Monodissidence. And their research interests include sexuality, violence, gender, trans identities, representation, and politics. So without further ado, I'll pass it on over to Jinx and send us home with this panel.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Just let me. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're all good.
Let me share my screen with you. So you should be seeing my screen right now. So good morning to everyone. I'm pleased to be here at the 4th International Bi+ Research Conference for the second consecutive year. I would like to thank the organizers of the event for the opportunity and also our host, Gabrielle, for introducing me. Today, I present the paper, The Renewal Case, Violence, Politics, and the Production of Memory in Alagoas. In this presentation, I provide a preliminary discussion on how memory has been constructed around the case of the assassination of Renildo José dos Santos, based on a few key perspectives, that of Renildo's family and those of the Brazilian homosexual movement. This presentation stems from my PhD research in social anthropology at the State University of Campinas, funded by the São Paulo Research Foundation. So the central objective of my research is to analyze the dramatic interplay involved in the production of memory and of the victim within the historical relations between sexuality and other forms of difference in Brazil, considering the repercussions and narratives surrounding the case of Renildo's murder. And the notion of memory I employ here draws primarily on Albach's theories of social memory in direct dialogue with Michael Pollack. These approaches, they shift the concept of memory from a more structuralist perspective, focusing on social institutions such as the family, the state, and religion, to a view more centered on the narratives and experiences of marginalized subjects. So by tracing the production of a victim of violence within the context of how a case is constructed through differing narratives, I take into account how violence, its meanings, and its subjects are being co-produced through the actions of various actors engaged in what I call complex entanglements. These entanglements, they are often framed by moral dimensions that challenge the very notion of the victim and even the binary of victim/perpetrator. Both victims and perpetrators are constituted by and interwoven with various relations of gender, race, sexuality, class, generation, and territoriality, which articulate gestures of violence that cut across practices and disputes involving the state, thereby substantiation broader narratives of violence. And to weave together and compare the narrative surrounding this memory, I have employed a combination of techniques within the context of an ethnographic approach. I have consulted both public and private archives, including state public archives, archives of Brazilian social movements, and the Amnesty International Secretariat archives at the International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam. Additionally, I have so far conducted 3 interviews with Renildo's sister and great-nephew, with one of the lawyers who served as a co-prosecutor in the legal proceedings related to the case, and with a member of the gay group of Bahia, which was one of the first homosexual groups to have existed in Brazil. It is within this theoretical and methodological framework that I examine the narrative surrounding the Renildo José dos Santos case. In 1992, at the age of 36, Renildo was elected as a councillor in Coqueiro Seco, a town in the state of Alagoas, Brazil, in the northeastern region of the country, which I have included a map there, so you can see painted in red. That's the small state of Alagoas. In a town that had back then fewer than 5,000 inhabitants. And Renildo worked for the Brazilian Postal Service, and some years prior to his election, he had become the main political opponent of the town's then mayor. Tensions between him and the mayor's political group escalated into threats and acts of violence. According to a document produced by local social movements, in 1989, Renildo was beaten by 3 police officers. Starting in 1991, he began receiving multiple death threats, particularly from the mayor's father. After reporting these threats to the police, Renildo survived an attempted assassination in 1991, carried out by military police officers hired by the mayor's father. He was hospitalized due to gunshot wounds. In January 1993, during an interview on a local radio station, the mayor's mother reportedly stated that the councillor was a stoner, drug trafficker, document forger, and a faggot. Renildo requested a right of reply, which was granted, and he declared that he was not a stoner, drug trafficker, or forger, but he was indeed bisexual, and saw no reason to be ashamed of his sexual orientation. He added that the mayor himself was homosexual. So in retaliation, Renildo's mandate was suspended in early 1993 for lack of decorum, following a vote in the Coqueiro Seco Municipal Chamber, which is the Brazilian town legislative. The president of the chamber stated, things will get worse if it is proven that he's having sex with men. This is a land of real men. Renildo was kidnapped and murdered on the night of 10th March 1993. He was brutally tortured and impaled. The first journalist to cover the case on television suggested a possible link between the councillor's bisexuality and the crime. The case garnered national and international attention, thanks to the efforts of Brazilian homosexual rights activists who demanded justice, but also Renildo's family. The crime was included in the 1994 Amnesty International report, which denounced violence against human rights activists and rural workers in Brazil. In the report, Renildo was identified as homosexual. The Australian Bisexual Network created in 1997 the Renildo José dos Santos Memorial Award, referring to Renildo as bi/gay. And this award, it was given to prominent bisexual activists such as Robin Ox, Lenny, and but in Brazil, where there was not yet an organized bisexual movement, which only began to take shape in a very incipient way in the mid-2000s, Renildo was referred to by the gay group of Bahia in its March 1993 bulletin as Brazil's foremost gay martyr. The analysis of the narratives around the Renildo case has revealed the complex layers of violence, erasure, and contestation present in the struggles for memory that have marked the recent history of homo/bisexual people in Alagoas and Brazil, especially during the period of redemocratization of the country, which started around 1985. His assassination cannot be understood in isolation from the tensions that marked both his public and private life. Renildo was a poor man, an active political leader in defense of rural workers, and someone who dared to make his bisexuality public within a deeply heteronormative and politically violent context. So by approaching the case from an ethnographic perspective, considering the different ways in which his memory has been mobilized by families, social movements, international institutions, and various state actors, this work has sought to critically reflect on the production of subjects, victims, and the memories surrounding them. Testimonies from Renildo's sister and great-nephew frame his assassination as both a political and a sexual crime, marked by his activism by acts of violence during his torture that were clearly gendered and sexualized, as he was impaled. The analysis of how memory has been constructed around the case also shows how it is multiple and contested, shaped by divergent interests and aims among social movements, activists, family members, and the state itself. While part of the Brazilian homosexual movement sought to construct Renildo's image as Brazil's foremost gay martyr, and although this has played an important role in raising awareness of homophobia in the country, it also obscured other dimensions of his life, such as his bisexuality and his pivotal role in advocating for rural workers and social causes. So this study seeks to contribute to a broader understanding of how violence, sexuality, and memory intersect in cases such as this, and how they co-produce one another. The Renildo case is paradigmatic not only for its brutality, but for what it reveals about the mechanisms of silencing resistance and the reconstruction of legacies at the margins of the state and citizenship. By listening to the accounts of those people who survived and resisted, such as his sister and great-nephew, we are urged to re-examine how justice, memory, and human rights are or are not effectively upheld in contexts shaped by violence and exclusion. So that concludes my presentation. I'm very happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jinx, for ending us off on such a great note, or an interesting note, I should say. I do want to mention really quickly that we were supposed to have a fourth panel presentation on this history panel, but the folks who were supposed to be doing that were having some tech issues that prevented them from being able to present or to send a recording in. So hopefully we'll be able to get their recording at a later date and share it once we also share all the recordings for the panel. So I believe we have about 25-ish minutes for questions since we don't have our fourth panelist. So if anyone would like to post some questions in the chat or raise their hand and ask verbally, we can go ahead and do that for the next, about 25-ish minutes or so. So please go ahead and ask our panelists anything about their presentation that you would like to know.
I'm happy to jump in and take the opportunity to ask a question to all panelists. It's really exciting that we have people at all different kind of stages of their research careers. I know we have undergrad students, we have PhD students presenting, we have postdocs presenting. I just wanted to ask about kind of what are your next steps in terms of your research, or where do you see this going, or yeah, what's happening next for all of you?
Okay, when I start, maybe. Yeah, I've just started my PhD this year, and I have still a lot of research in literature and especially in the archives to do. And then I can maybe see where the work will take me, because it's a bit hard because there's no term for bisexuality in the medieval times. So I really don't know if the sources I get will bring the results I want to have. So I'm not really sure if I can finish my PhD with what I think that bisexual defendants were not punished that hard in comparison to homosexual defendants. That's what I believe at the moment, but I'm not sure if this will be the result after finishing my PhD.
Yeah, I guess we just go in order. Yeah, as you may have noticed, my presentation topic is not what I'm going to be writing my bachelor's thesis on. And yeah, I guess my issue at the moment is that I have several of these very specific topics that interest me a lot. So I'm definitely going to stick with the topic for my bachelor's because it still fits with my interest in, yeah, gender and sexuality. It's still a very interesting topic to me. And then I do hope, though, that I can pursue something about Fyodor and Ivan and their representation in different pieces of media, maybe in some other research project in the future. I mean, I'm gonna go on to do my master's and then hopefully also a PhD. So there should be some room to fit it in there eventually. Yeah.
So in my case, I have spent the last 1 year or so gathering a lot of archival material. So what I'm doing right now is organizing all of the documents that I have gathered. And as for the next phase of after organizing this material, I think the next phase of the research will be to look specifically at how the Brazilian bisexual movement is remembering renewal right now in the present time. So that would be my next task, I think.
Aurelio, go ahead.
Thank you, Gabby. And thank you, all the presenters, for this amazing presentation. All three have done an amazing work. I'm so happy to hear about this history. Also regarding the tragic histories that we have, as Anna-Lea actually told us about the torture and everything. Of course, it's interesting. But I will to catch back on what Jinx just said. About how movements or historians, monosexual historians, are talking about these things. So for both Jinx and Anna-Lea, if you could tell us a bit more, like on how monosexuals historians have been talked about these figures or these historic cases, because we do have a lot of by erasure, of course, we know that. And in Italy also, I think we have some studies on the Austro-Hungarian period of tribadism, and now bisexuality was not really mentioned very much, also by monosexual scholar. And then just these two questions, whoever wants to go first. And for Svenja, I would like to ask you, what about, you talk about the recent movies, but I'm sure we can also discuss like what there's like a fandom, there's like ships. Did the fan fictions also drive a bit of your research, or is driving it right now? There's some discourses about that, because very interested about that.
Yeah, I would actually say that it was the fandom initially that got me hooked on this topic. Because, yeah, as someone who is queer themselves and then moving around in queer fandom spaces, and also history, of course, like this intersection, and then you come across suddenly, oh, Ivan the Terrible, and the guy at his court that he apparently had a sexual/love affair with. And yeah, then I started actually from there, first looking at the adaptations and then the history, so the other way around. And then I was lucky enough that I was able to fit this topic into my research for a university project. And so I did write an entire term paper on it. But yeah, it's that.
Thank you. I figure. And Jinx and Anna-Lea, what do you think about like what did historians interpret if they did these figures and cases?
I don't know, should I go first? I can start. What I have noticed is that in the same way that this story is told in multiple way by social movements and by activists, monosexual and bisexual activists, it is also told in different ways and multiple ways by historians. But yes, the way that Henildo is portrayed, it really differs from who and when the story is told. So because it was important for the Brazilian homosexual movement to portray him as a gay man, because they wanted to push for this idea that Brazil was not safe for LGBT people, and so it was important at that time to portray him as a gay man, even though he was not, and he said he was not. But nowadays we are seeing much more people, and I don't think monosexual historians are doing that, but it's mainly I think done by activists of the bisexual movement. But Renildo is there is an effort to remember him as bisexual more than in the past, I think, and that is really due to the bisexual movement. It is not the work of historians and not the work of monosexual historians, but more the work of bisexual activists and bisexual researchers, in fact. So it's really an interesting question, because people will portray him in different ways, really depending on the political strategy that the group or the activists are putting through. So that would be my answer from what I have been following.
Thank you.
Yeah, for my topic, there's no research on bisexuality in pre-modern times in the Holy Roman Empire of German nation. So the monosexual historians who did explore these cases only write about the homosexual acting people, and they completely erase the other ones. That's why I'm doing this, because I hope that I get a lot of answers from this, and also to have more bi-representation as a bi-historian myself, especially in the case of like Katharina Hetzeldorfer. She's quite prominent in the medieval societies in Germany, but her sexual partners, no one knows them, so that's quite interesting, and I really hope that the other ones get a bit more prominent with my research, and get more answers to bisexuality and other forms of non-monosexual behaviors in these times.
Thank you all. Do we have any other questions for the panelists? I think we might have a couple. Lucia, yes, go ahead.
And hi all. It was a very brilliant panel, but the combination of Egenstein and fandom just sparked all my interest. So I was wondering, Svenja, if you could tell us a bit more about those fan products, because I saw some fan arts and some fan fictions. And I'm afraid to ask, but is it all in Russian, or is there something for consumption for people like, you know, some bisexual researchers that are not that fluent in Russian and could consume it?
Yeah, sadly, I have to say most of the fandom is in Russian, happens in Russian spaces. I think there are some works also, at least in English. But for example, the book that I mentioned from 2022 is written entirely in Russian. And what I'm doing at the moment is I have bought a copy and I'm reading it with a translator to aid me. So it's not ideal, but I'm also too interested in this topic to, not go and try to consume also some of the Russian content. Because obviously it's also really interesting to see what they are actually doing over there in Russia with their very own history. So you have to look a little. You can find some stuff in English, but most of it is still Russian. Yeah.
Thank you. I will have to learn Russian then, because I think have an Ivan fiction is too appealing for me.
I thought about the same thing, because especially the movie from 1991 has not come out in any decent form with good subtitles or anything. So yeah, it's a bit of a struggle without Russian.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.